a post on our blog on testdriveyourfuture.com that says how different would things be if every time you went into one of your college classes, you had to pay admission at the door like you do at the movies or to a concert, and then you'd want to break down. And so I challenge people in that post to break down and figure out how much their classes are actually costing them. And in the post, I use the example of, I think it was at Princeton. Like, okay, so let's say that you have a 3-hour biology lab at Princeton once a week. And I took what was the tuition and room and board at Princeton at that time, which was like $60,000 a year, and did all of the math. And I included a calculator in the blog post so kids could look up any school and figure out how to do this. But it turned out that class was $400. If you had to pay $400 to get into the classroom for 3 hours to sit there and listen to the teacher, you better well believe you'd be taking damn good notes.
That is amazing. Yeah.
And well, people wouldn't even tolerate it. If people actually realized how much their classes were costing them, they would be up in arms. There'd be rioting, in front of the dean's office.
I'm moving house today. It's been 2 years, 8 months and 28 days. And I've got to say that as I step off the bus for what could be the last time spent as sitting in your boss supermarket queues, etc. And I have to say though, it's only today that I'm glad to be leaving. I really will miss the when Santa. Today I'm sad, but tomorrow I'll be glad when Santa. When Santa.
You're listening to truthconduit.com with Chris McMillan.
Let's get started. Jim Hood in the house. Jim Hood, you've been very busy since season 1 of Autonomy. We met face to face. I got a photo somewhere of us hanging out. You were in
Red Pill Expo.
Yeah, Red Pill Expo. You flew all the way from Hawaii, and this is our second interview. Actually, do you remember way back in what seems like forever ago? We've got an interview out there on my website somewhere, and in the Autonomy website, of you and I shooting the breeze, doing an integration exercise.
Yeah, prior to Truth Conduit. That was awesome.
You've been very busy. You're force to be reckoned with because of what you were doing before Autonomy, and then you came into Autonomy, and that really honed in everything that's going on now. You've got this course. It's a solution to the problem of what's going on in public education. Your course is called Test Drive Your Future. So, I could talk about it, but I'll give some basic introduction for anyone listening who still doesn't have the grammar aspect of it, who might be curious. There will be people listening who may have heard of it, but are still not quite sure what's this course about. Basic introduction, what's it about?
Great. Well, it's now an online course, but it actually started out as a couple of books that my wife and I published about 10 years ago. And the way we described it was the book that we wish that we would had when we were, 17 years old. Because both of us kind of went into college not really having any idea of what we wanted to do with ourselves. And so we kind of bumbled along for a while, spent way more money than we used to, way more time, and ultimately graduated with degrees that we're not even using. One of the stories that we tell in the book is that my wife was a psychology and women's studies major.
And what was your major, Jim?
My major was psychology as well. And I've got a master's degree in gerontology, and neither of us are using our degrees at all. But my wife's story in particular was that she made her decision to major in psychology based on the decision of her boyfriend. Like her junior year of college, she was dating this guy, and they're sitting there at the end of a date, and he's talking about his future plans. And he's like, yeah, I think I'm going to major in psychology when I get to college. And Beth's like, oh, well, that's a good idea. I'll do that too. And like, literally, that was it. That was like all the thought that went into the decision, and then, 4 or 5 years later, Beth comes out of the University of Vermont with this, multi tens of thousands of dollars in student loan debt and a degree that she's not really interested in using. And what we found so Beth and I struggled for years to really get our legs under us to try to figure out what it is that we wanted to do with ourselves, who we were, what we were interested in, how we wanted to make our living, the impact that we wanted to have in the world. And we're like, man, and we found that this is a very common problem. Like right now, I think there's like maybe 1.7 trillion dollars in student loan debt. And you've got countless people out there who have gone through school and changed their majors multiple times, still graduated with the degree they're not using. But they are, tens of thousands of dollars in debt, 10, 20 years down the road.
And that debt doesn't leave you. It's not like a mortgage. You can't get rid of that debt. Is that right?
Well, for the most part, no, you can't. But just last night, I read an article saying that there was a guy who was able to successfully get his loans discharged in bankruptcy court. But I mean, I think they said that there are, maybe 20,000 people a year that try, and like a couple that succeed. I mean, it's a very, very rare. They've made it very difficult to get rid of student loan debt. I mean, in the article, he talked about like it was easier for the bank CEOs that crashed the economy in 2008 to get forgiveness than it is for him to get forgiveness. He went to law school, and after he got out, he decided he didn't want to be a lawyer. And this loan's been haunting him for 20 years, not able to do anything about it. It's like easier for those corporate CEOs to get forgiveness than it was for me.
Huh?
Crazy how it works.
Yeah. So you were in you had this debt. You weren't thinking about getting out of it. So what happened next?
Well, ultimately, so so the short version of Beth's and my story is that we've both finished, college / graduate school in like 1999, and we didn't know what to do with ourselves. So we put off the real world for yet another year by joining AmeriCorps. And we met in Seattle doing Habitat for Humanity. That's how we spent that first year out of school. Like we didn't know what else to do with ourselves, so we'll do that. And after that opportunity, we got regular full-time jobs, but after a while discovered, they really weren't ringing our bells. It wasn't what we wanted to do with ourselves, but we really didn't know what we wanted to do with ourselves, which is what ultimately led us to Hawaii. Back in 2003, we decided that we would just take a sabbatical from the quote unquote real world for a year and just come to Hawaii, have an adventure, and have some time to go on a bit of a journey of self-reflection, so to speak, to figure out who we were and what we wanted out of life. And so we ended up moving here to this homestead run by this guy where he had goats and chickens and things like that. And so we ended up taking care of livestock and helping with his gardens and whatnot. But it was only a part-time gig. So we had a tremendous amount of time to do that bit of introspection and reflection that we didn't have a chance to do prior to having gone to college. I mean, it's like, when you're 16, 17 years old, it's like you're put on this conveyor belt and you're just kind of, you're put on the conveyor belt like in kindergarten, but things like really accelerate there at the end. And then you're so busy with your academics and your sports and your, significant other that you're dating and whomever, that it just, not nearly enough time and attention is paid to this college and career decision as what should be. I mean, most people before they're making what could potentially be a 6-figure decision that would have ramifications for the rest of their lives, you would think that we would put a lot of time and effort into it. But for the most part, that's not really what happens. And so this ultimately was the genesis of Test Drive Your Futures, because we wanted to create this resource that young people could use to guide them through that really huge decision in a way that, guidance that they just might not have received from anywhere else.
I was laughing earlier at this with your wife, because I did the same thing. I had no idea going into college I just thought, what's the easiest degree I can get, which was an English degree. And don't get me wrong, I love literature and reading and poetry and all that. But yeah, what a useless degree. I've never used it in my life, ever. Ever. But yeah, the motivation that you guys got when you took a step back, you're off grid. So you were actually able to think clearly for arguably the first times in your lives.
Right.
Really.
Right.
I mean,
yeah. And we were literally off grid. I mean,
Yeah.
we were solar power. We were, no TV signals, no anything. We got, a classic rock radio station. That was about it. And so it was pretty much just us and our books. And it was fantastic.
So the first
I
thing you did was you wrote a book together once you got this project going. Is that right?
Yeah, we actually wrote 3 books. We wrote one back in 2007, 2008 called "Where's the Map," and that was a great start, but it didn't get us to where we really wanted to be. It didn't accomplish the goal of extracting that information from young people as well as we wanted. So then we rewrote it and labeled it "Test Drive Your Future," and we made one edition for high school students and one for college students who might already be a year or 2 into their education, but are still struggling to find their major and their path.
Then it kind of got shelved, didn't it? It kind of, because I remember when I met you in autonomy, this was an idea that had been brewing for a long time. And then basically once you got into autonomy, that's when you really put it all together.
Right. Yeah. We had, we put a tremendous amount of effort into writing the books, and I have a full-time IT business. My wife's a web designer, and so we were getting up at 4:00 in the morning every day and writing from 4 until 8. And it took us still about the better part of a year to finish the book. And after that tremendous amount of effort, it was like, oh my gosh, we got it up in Amazon, and we just kind of let things go on autopilot for a little while. And ultimately we ended up putting it just on the back burner, just kind of letting Amazon do its thing. We were, people were finding us and they were buying our books, and it was cool. And Beth and I decided to focus our efforts on buying our first home and starting our family, which is ultimately what we spent a few years doing.
I mean, that is the most important thing. That's what it's all about.
Yeah. And we're not as young as we used to be. So the clock was starting to tick. So we needed to get that taken care of, and things finally became favorable. I mean, the real estate here in Hawaii just got bonkers during the run up. A 3-bedroom, 2-bath house with a carport was like $750,000.
And it wasn't before when you first moved to Hawaii?
No,
really?
No. That same house was like a third of that price.
I can't believe that. I've always assumed that from the beginning of time, Hawaii's just been the most expensive place in the world.
Oh, well, Hawaii, it definitely is. But we're on Big Island, and over on Oahu, where Honolulu is significantly more expensive. It's still a lot more expensive here than it is other places. But there was a period of time for years that we couldn't have even dreamed of getting into the home housing market, just because everything was so crazy. But then right around the time that we had finished our books, that was when things started to come back down after years of being really inflated. And we just ultimately decided to, like I said, start the family, get the home. And once we got all that taken care of, and our daughter got to the point where she was old enough to go to Montessori school, had a little bit more bandwidth, it was like, oh, well, we wrote these books. Let's see what we can do, because we still believe very much in the mission, and the need, I think, is just increasing because college tuitions are just going up, by a huge percentage more than other expenses in our cost of living. There are just so many things that universities are doing, bringing on these expenses that don't really have anything to do with educating young people. You've got really fancy dorms and really fancy gyms, and a dean for this and a dean for that, and but I don't know that it's really improving the quality of education any, but it's certainly driving the price up. I mean, I went to Illinois State University, which is mid-level state college in the Midwest. When I went there, tuition, room, and board was $10,000 a year, and now I think it's $29,000.
My goodness.
That's just insane for, I mean, it's an okay school, but it's not an awesome school, and still a 4-year bachelor's degree, you're looking at $120,000. And then you think about the fact that most kids are actually taking 6 years to graduate instead of 4, throw a couple more years on top of that, and it's just insane.
And they're not learning anything of value, arguably, unless, obviously if they become an engineer or a doctor, that is something necessary. But the general across the board degrees, there are very few degrees out there that you can't really teach yourself. you know,
Oh,
that,
right. Yeah.
but they want that degree, don't they?
Right, right. And in some cases they're required to have, like, the school that I went to was a normal school. It was a teacher's college. And so they primarily graduated school teachers. And, but the thought that a public school teacher would have to spend $120 to $180,000 to get a $30,000 a year job when they graduate is just insane.
It's just a conflated system of a bunch of BS, really. I mean, there's so much money and time involved, and there's no quality going on. And
Right.
that's what you're doing, and what we're doing in autonomy is we're just cutting that corner and going straight
Right.
to the good stuff.
Right.
How did you come to realize that public schooling, there are gaps there are things missing that you can offer?
Well, it's something that I didn't really, when we, well, trying to think, we did realize when we were writing our books, it seemed like the guidance that we were given in our high school years just wasn't adequate for, like I said, to lead us to make a good decision related to college and career. And we really just got to thinking about what we wish people had asked us, the big questions. And like I said, we that was when Facebook was really starting to get going. Everyone was hopping on and people were engaging with each other a lot more than they were just like posting memes. And
So what year are we talking about?
Well, we started writing our first book in 2008, and then
Okay.
we wrote Test Drive Your Future in 2010 and 2011. And so we used Facebook to conduct conversations with dozens and dozens of people in our age group just to find out what their experience was like and it was our variations of our story over and over and over again. And we were able to ask people, what is it you thought that you were missing out on? What is it you wish you'd had? And so we were able to take all these conversations we have coupled with our own experience and synthesize this course that we, ultimately, like I said, wish we would have had when we were that age. I don't know, at the time, we didn't realize that, what was missing and why it was missing from the public school system. It seems now that there are a lot of things that are left out intentionally, to create a group of obedient consumers.
George Carlin was right.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yep.
Pretty much. And I will have to admit that up until a few years ago, I was pretty naive to that fact. And I would have, it seems silly that the world needed something like the book that I'd written, but it really felt like that was missing.
Yeah.
And
the intentional taking out of, what are we talking about here? We're talking about critical thinking. We're talking about logic.
Right.
Yeah, they are intentionally left out of the public school system. How did you come to, what were some of your sources come to start to really flesh this out?
Well, I was introduced to Brett and the School Sucks podcast probably in 2015. It was actually just a few months after our daughter was born. And the timing of that was so amazing. I will be forever grateful that I ran across that information when I did, because our daughter was just a few months old and we were just starting to figure out how we wanted to parent and what kinds of things we wanted to expose our daughter to. And so, School Sucks led me to the works of John Taylor Gatto, which I've probably read each of his books maybe 2 or 3 times, and just absolutely fascinating. No idea, no clue, just being as naive as I was, just assuming like, oh, I can't believe they leave this stuff out of our curriculum. Why is that? How can you graduate from high school not knowing how to balance a checkbook? Those silly people, how could they overlook that?
And then when you dive deep into Gatto's work, you realize he answers all those questions. He names names.
Mm-hmm.
He really just lays it all out. It blows my mind these days when I meet other families who homeschool. Not often, but it has happened, who still have not heard of John Taylor Gatto.
Right.
Sometimes, I'm on Facebook groups of homeschooling groups as well. And every once in a while I'll get involved, and I always make an effort to point out his work, just in case there's somebody out there who's homeschooling and they have not read the works of John Taylor
yeah, absolutely.
Gatto.
I'm always, because my information of all these things has really come from, tragedy and hope and school sucks and all of that. I'm really surprised. I was surprised, within the last few years to learn that there are a lot of people who are very aware of all of this stuff who've never heard of these works. There are all over the country, there are charter schools and private schools that are teaching a classical trivium based education that, like I hadn't heard of it until I'd heard those interviews with Gino Denning and whatnot. But yeah, there are a lot of people who are homeschooling for similar reasons and sending kids to these alternative sources of schooling that have never heard of Gatto, never heard of a lot of the things that brought us to what we know.
Yeah, or even the methodology of the trivium. It's a method used to solve problems. The way you approach a situation, you just make sure you cover your bases before taking the next step.
Right.
And that applies to anything in life. And of course, the classical trivium, as Kevin Cole has pointed out, is a tool. It's an effective tool. It has been used to oppress people. Actually, it's such a powerful. Yet he made a really good point. It's ingrained in all of us, but to bring it to the conscious level and say, okay, whoa, we're going too fast. Let's slow down. Let's cover this before we make the next step. Right. It really is that simple. But in public schooling, they just jumped straight to either the grammar or the rhetoric. They skip the grammar, or they'll skip steps. They skip around. Mm-hmm. That's one of the many problems that, from what I understand.
Right, and then everything is taught in such a disjointed way. They don't form a synthesis that is easily comprehensible. You've just got all of these independent subjects that a student can't put it together. Like, why are they teaching me this? Why am I learning this? Why are they wasting my time?
Exactly. Whereas, the way they separate the subjects, mm-hmm. That's not reality.
No.
Wow. What else? Where were we? We got sidetracked there. We were talking about John Taylor Gatto. Oh yeah, you were fleshing out. Okay, something's wrong. They're keeping things like logic and critical thinking and other things out of public education. So you found a gap, and you've worked on the course. You started filling in the details, and then what happened?
Right. Well. So ultimately, what Beth and I ended up doing was we decided after the book had been in Amazon for a few years that it had started to get out of date. And so not only were some of the links that we put in it not even in existence anymore, but I learned a lot since then that I wanted to convey. And I've left a lot of this information that you and I were just discussing out of that. I've got a few little things here and there, but the ultimate goal with the course is to try to encourage thought. To just, it's, I don't consider myself to be any kind of college and career planning expert, or that my method is any better than some others that are out there. But what I've tried to do is to just ask very powerful questions to really encourage people to consider where they're coming from and where they're going in a way that they hadn't before. Because if you never get asked the question, you never have the opportunity to think about it, and you never really get the chance to come up with the answer. And that's ultimately what I'm trying to provide to people.
And that's so important, to always be asking questions.
Right.
I'm trying to improve that myself. It's one thing that I'm constantly reminded of as I push through. I'm always studying, because I certainly did not ask enough questions when I was younger. It's so important to ask these questions. And the Socratic method, we never learned about that. For example, there's so many, I can't, I've drawn a blank as far as, because I'm thinking, what are the details? What exactly are we talking about? And I do have that question. It's a pretty straightforward question. In Test Drive Your Future, what is there that's offered that you couldn't get in public schools?
Oh my goodness. I think a lot of the elements are there in public school. Again, it's just the way that we've tried to synthesize them. One of the elements that I'm most proud of in Test Drive Your Future that I really didn't find elsewhere was having very frank conversations about money. Because like I made the little joke earlier saying that, you're not even taught how to balance a checkbook when you're in high school, let alone, taught about loans and interest and investments, all of those things. And so most young people have very little understanding of, I mean, never mind our fractional reserve banking system. I mean, they don't even understand how, what we would consider to be, I mean, 95% of people don't understand fractional reserve banking, but it isn't until you've been out in the world for several years that you would even be confronted with and have to, deal with the idea that you need to get a loan to buy a car or a home mortgage or something like that. And so what we challenge people to do in Test Drive Your Future, and we wrote the book and the course so that every lesson has a component for both students and for their parents or a mentor or a guardian or whomever, because we really think that it would be hugely beneficial for young people to go through the course with an older person, because most of these questions they've never been asked, and most of these ideas they've not been exposed to in this way. And so in particular, in the section I'm referring to, we ask the young person to sit down with their parents and have very frank conversations about money. Like, most teenagers have absolutely no clue how much money their parents make. They have no idea how much their house costs. They might have some idea of how much a car costs, because they see advertisements and whatever, but maybe utilities. I mean, just the cost, daily cost of living. A student wouldn't have any idea what it costs to run your family, or what kind of money the parent brings in to take care of those costs, or to take care of retirement down the road. And so we've set it up so parent and student sit down and have a very frank conversation. And I know this can be very challenging for people because there's such a taboo in our culture about talking about these numbers. But I think it's very important for parents to be very upfront with their kids. This is how much money I make. This is how much money your mother and I make. This is our budget. This is how much our house costs. We can sit down and look at the numbers. What is our monthly budget? What's going to our mortgage? What's going to groceries? What's going to the utility bills? What's going into the college fund? What's going into retirement savings? Because most students are obviously very familiar with the standard of living that they enjoy, but they don't have any notion whatsoever of what it costs to maintain that standard of living. And we've all got so accustomed to these standards of living that we grew up with, we're all kind of expecting it. Like, oh, of course we'd be able to have a top of the line smartphone. Of course we'd be able to buy this car. Of course we'd be able to live in this house, in this type of neighborhood, and go on these trips. And it's largely lost on this generation of people that you kind of start out at the bottom and work your way up. And that's something that I was raised with. I'm guessing that you might have been as well, but it's not a concept that's emphasized much anymore, and something that we're really trying to convey in that chapter. I'm like, okay, here's how much it costs your family to live. Here's how much your parents make. Here's how they started out. Let's have parents sit down and tell them what it was like when mom and dad first got together. What was the budget like? What did they make? How did they make ends meet? I grew up, my parents worked opposite shifts because that's what they had to do. My dad worked in a factory, my mom worked in an office, and they would literally pass each other on the highway every day as mom was coming home from work and dad was going to work. And that's what they did to make it work for our family. And that's part of the reason I wanted to go to college, is because I didn't want that to be my reality for my family. And thus far it hasn't, but it isn't really because of what I studied in college. I mean, luckily I gained some other skills along the way that I've been utilizing for the last decade and a half that have been providing my living. But here we are.
That's a great example. And Robert Kiyosaki comes to mind because he says the same thing. He's always bashing the public education system for exactly what you just said. They do not teach about money. And according to Kiyosaki, and I probably according to John Taylor Gatto as well, I don't remember if he talked about that or not, but according to Kiyosaki, it's intentional. They don't want people. They don't want young people to learn about money. I remember, when I look forward to telling my kids a story of, when my early days, fresh out of college in Madrid, I started teaching English, and I would go to a company and do the class, and then I'd go to the bathroom and shove the rolls of toilet paper into my backpack as I left the building. So, and that pretty much summarizes my, the state that I was in. So.
Wow.
Good times. It builds character
yeah.
being dirt poor when you've got nothing. That's for sure.
Exactly. Yeah. When Beth and I first moved to Hawaii, after we left the farm, my wife had decided she wanted to be an acupuncturist. And that was where the genesis of Test Drive Your Future came from, kind of, is that she had this idea that she wanted to embark upon a career in natural health. And she wasn't sure whether she wanted to become a naturopathic physician or an acupuncturist. And so she went and interviewed and then interned with both to decide which she liked better. And then ultimately she decided on a career in acupuncture, which she has since left because she found something she liked even more, but in web design. But when we first got here, I was stocking shelves at a grocery store. That was the only job I could find. My take home was $1,000 a month. The rent was $900, and honestly, if it hadn't been for the fruit and vegetables that got wilty, in the produce aisle, and stuff I got to bring home. I mean, Beth and I would come and we'd cut the moldy spots off the apples and we'd cut the bad spots out of the tomatoes. And that made up a good, 40, 50% of our diet, and that's, but I'm very proud to say that we never had to go on food stamps. We never had to accept any kind of assistance because we wanted to grind it out and make it on our own. And that's what we did.
Exactly. Good. I think it's a great example. So you teach about money in Test Drive Your Future. And also there's a supplemental, or there's a part of it that focuses on logic as well.
Yeah. And so that's kind of the bonus that comes along for when people enroll in Test Drive Your Future, is we've got a critical thinking course that we go through. It's more of a guide that had already existed. It's not something that I created, but I convey to them in that this is something huge that is missing from the education system. I mean, not even just at the public level, but for the most part at the private level now, unless you're going to the very best of schools, this is missing. And it's something that I know was missing when I grew up, because I grew up, a big TV addict, and have since left that behind. But it's now that I've gained these critical thinking skills over the last few years, it's laughable, some of the things that you see out in the world that are the wool is pulled over the eyes of the vast majority of the population because they weren't taught to ask just a few basic questions about who's giving this information to them, why are they doing that, what's in it for them. It's just being able to answer those questions. It's just absolutely huge. And you can get around a lot of the misinformation that's out in the world. I mean, it makes me so angry, all of the censorship that's going on now and all these proposed laws. Like, I mean, in Europe, they're going nuts saying, oh, well, we're going to fine Facebook, a ton of money if they don't remove fake news within, so many hours. And it's like, this wouldn't even be an issue if people had the tools that they needed to figure these things out for themselves. In an ideal world, I suppose nobody would publish fake news, but if we want to live in a free society, then people have to have the freedom to write whatever and publish whatever it is they want. And then it's up to the consumer to determine whether what they're reading is legitimate or not. But the powers that be are assuming that we don't have those skills. And so, Big Daddy needs to protect us from, this potentially harmful information. And that can lead nowhere good from what I've come to believe. And it's heartbreaking that we don't have those skills. And so that is something that I wanted to offer up to my students as well. Because I don't think it takes much. I mean, you don't need to go through several college level logic courses to be able to see something on TV or read it in the news and say, well, that's BS.
It's all about asking the right questions, just learning to ask questions, isn't it?
Right.
And critical thinking ties into the logic as well. It's all kind of tied in. Um, would you say those are the three main things that, like, money, logic, critical thinking? And then I suppose the course covers a lot of the basics as well. Like if I noticed there's interviewing practice, but
Right.
like communication skills.
Yeah, it's everything that you would expect out of a college and career course. You know, the course is really divided into three parts, and the first part is like the journey of self-exploration, figuring out, you know, who they are, where they came from, how their past has shaped them, their preferences, their skills, their interests, and once you've kind of got all of that, you know, down on paper, so to speak, you know, it's staring you right in the face, then you can kind of, you know, look for patterns, see if there's something there that you hadn't seen before. We also invite people, once they've got all this information, to go talk to their friends or their relatives or their parents about what they've discovered about themselves, because we often have blinders on, and there are things about ourselves that we don't even see that somebody else might see. And like, oh, well, you know, you are, you know, fantastically mechanically inclined. And you're like, oh, well, I never even thought about it. I just kind of get under the hood and do my thing, you know? So asking for that type of feedback. And then the second part of the course is where you're actually, you know, trying to figure out how you could apply these things that you've discovered about yourself. If you have this skill, if you have this interest, okay, now what's available to me? How could I put that into practice in the marketplace, you know, in the form of career? Great. Now that I figured that out, what would it take? What is the shortest path from where I am to where I want to be in regards to how I could get that career? I mean, because people could take a meandering path. I mean, so like I said, I've been doing IT work for 15 years. It was my part-time minimum wage job in college. You know, I could have skipped college and graduate school altogether and been doing the same work. So helping people try to figure out what's the shortest path between, you know, A to B. And then the thing that caused us to name it Test Drive Your Future is actually the third part of the course, where we challenge people to go out into the world. And like, if you think you want to be a dentist, you know, great. You've been seeing a dentist since you were, you know, 4 years old. Go ask your dentist if you could get together with them for, you know, half an hour, talk to them about their career. You know, what's your day like? What's your favorite part? What's your least favorite part? What was your schooling like? Did you enjoy it? What of all the schools that are available that you're aware of, what do you think what's your favorite? Just these questions. We really just encourage people, like, if you think that you want to be a dentist, go out and talk to them, and get as close to as you can to participating in that career. We invite people to do job shadows. We invite people to do internships if it's a type of career that would allow for that. Like, you know, Beth spent 6 or 8 weeks both in a naturopathic office and a acupuncturist office, just watching them, listening to them, talking with them at the end of the day to just kind of summarize what they'd seen, and it really helped her clarify her decision. And my joke is, I mean, we have Beth and her story with her boyfriend, but I always joke that when I decided to major in psychology, I thought I wanted to be a psychologist or a psychiatrist, but the only therapist I was familiar with was Dr. Fraser Crane from the TV show Cheers, you know, and he just sat in the bar all day.
Yeah.
I didn't obviously learn much about being a therapist from that, but I mean, that was about as close as I got to having any kind of an interaction with a therapist or gleaning any information from one. Like, had I known, I would have, you know, looked some people up. I would have had some conversations. I would have sat down and had coffee with people. Maybe I'd even have gone in for a counseling session to see what it was like, you know, but I didn't do any of that.
And that ties in with, you know, we've covered quite a few of your 6 mistakes you made in college. You know, there's so many mistakes. We've talked about several of them. And also I like how it's the 3 parts, you know, I mean, basically you're describing to me the 3 parts, and that's grammar, logic, rhetoric, isn't it?
It is. And, you know, when we wrote it, I didn't even realize that I was doing that, but it does fall into grammar, logic, rhetoric just perfectly.
Yeah, because it is a natural thing, that it's a natural part of the learning process. But if you're more aware of it and you put it to the conscious level, you're less likely to skip steps and make less mistakes. It's
Right.
interesting. We never stop learning this stuff. I love it. What else about the course? Like, how long is it?
The course is 3 months. There are about 50 modules. that are in the course. I've added a few in the last couple months that I thought were important. I didn't want to make. I mean, it sounds like a lot, but I don't think that it's all that overwhelming. Most of the modules could be completed in maybe 15 to 30 minutes. Some of the longer ones where we're actually asking people to do a decent amount of research, like, oh, if you think you want to be a dentist again, go on. Here's a few websites where you could go. Because the government actually does a really good job of putting together a lot of information about just about every career you could think of. Like, oh, is it on the rise or is it declining? What are the salaries you could expect based on the different regions? What are the different educational requirements depending upon which state you live in? All that information is right there. It's great. And then it would take a decent amount of time to research potential schools. And then obviously, if you decided to do an internship or a job shadow, that would be potentially a significant amount of time. But for the most part, the other lessons could be done easily, just working on it maybe a few hours a week.
And people can pretty much enroll whenever. There's no.
Oh yeah. Yeah. We don't do an open close type of enrollment with our course. It's people stumble upon it, and they can pretty much enroll on demand basis. What I generally invite people to do is we've got our 6 mistakes PDF. We've got a 40-minute webinar that I recorded last year that really breaks down the problem as I see it and our solution and the benefits of participating in the course. I think it spells it out very well. And then after you have absorbed all of that, if you think that this is something that would be a match for you, I invite people to get on the phone with me for a 30 to 60-minute conversation, so we can really start diving into their particular situation, what they're hoping to get out of it, and to try to determine whether they're a fit for the course and the course is a fit for them.
Yeah, there's just a button there. It says contact you, and they fill in the form and then arrange a call. It's pretty much that simple, isn't it?
Yes.
I love this. This is on your website. This part, I just love this. And it's true. It's sad, but it's a reality that not many people are aware of. You've written, or the information is here, most degrees are not used, not necessary, or underutilized. And then the statistics, 77% of college graduates are not working in the field of their college major within 4 years of graduation. And that's from the National Center for Educational Statistics. Over 50% of recent graduates from several popular majors report being underemployed. And then 80% of physical education majors and 91% of project management majors say they don't use what they learned in school on the job.
Right.
So
yeah, those are the most extreme examples, but I mean, there are so many cases. I mean, where by the time you get out of school, what you've learned is completely obsolete. Brett talks about that because he was a communications major in the late 90s, and by the time he got out of school, the technology that they taught him about in school was not even relevant. I read this book over the summer. By this Canadian guy, and the joke that he made, he was a music major, and he said, "Oh, I went to this Canadian arts college," and he's like, "While I was there, they created a brand new major, this innovative new major in jazz." And he's like, jazz hasn't been popular for 60 years. I mean, not like it's always there, but it's not like the commercial force that it was, like, say, back in the 1940s. It's like,
but why major in it? Why get, there's so many stupid degrees. It's all about trying to control the narrative, isn't it? Really? Right. Seriously. The best jazz musicians in the world, I bet you none of them have a degree in jazz.
Right. Probably not.
Wow. Well, cool, Jim. What else? The course, anytime you can enroll in it. And the platform, that's what I was going to ask. The platform you use, is it Teachable? What is it?
It is Teachable. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Yep.
Cool.
So we're using
Teachable's
Teachable.
great.
We're using Discord like we did on Autonomy as a means to interact with one another, and just encouraging students to mix it up a little bit. I've invited some Autonomy folks, if they ever feel like it, to come in and interact with students. That would be amazing, because you're such a wonderful group of people to get to know.
I need access to this channel. I do. Yeah. I want access to your Discord
I
channel,
will, I
Jim.
will, I will happily do that. No problem. No
Yeah, cool.
problem.
And uh, demographics. So I mean, it's younger people who are kind of thinking about their future, but I mean, really, it could spill into, I mean, in theory, there's nobody who couldn't take the course, right?
Exactly. Exactly. I mean, as it works, I think just as well for someone, it might actually work better for somebody who's looking to change careers a little later in life than it would be for I mean, truth be told, the entire time we've done the course, it's been an uphill battle because I've joked for years with Beth that it's the course that everybody needs that nobody wants. Because if you think about it, I mean, what were you thinking about when you were 17? I was thinking about hanging out with my friends. I was thinking about my girlfriend. I was thinking about, whatever was in pop culture right then. But putting as much time as I should have into college was not as much on the radar as it should have been. And things really aren't all that much different. So it takes a very special person to actually enroll in Test Drive Your Future, simply for the fact that most people are so busy and so distracted that the real tragedy of all of it is people find that they want and need my coaching and my course more when they're 23, 24 than they did when they were 16, 17, and 18. And that's at exactly the wrong time. I mean, because think about it, you're 18 years old, you haven't started school yet. Man, your life's a blank slate. And you haven't got tens of thousands of dollars in debt, and you haven't been to school and changed your major 2 or 3 times, and it's unfortunate that the world's at the point now where it's wanting triage more than it's wanting preventive medicine. I mean, I guess that's the nature of things for the most part, but that's kind of the reality of it. But I've had a lot of luck with people in their 30s and in their 40s actually using my materials and utilizing my coaching services, because then they're serious about it. They're like, oh man, I've been doing this thing for 20 years that I don't really like, or I need to increase my income to take better care of my family, but I'm not exactly sure how. And when you're in that situation, man, you've really got their attention in a completely different way.
Would it be safe to argue that it's a course for swimmers? Now, do you know what I mean by swimmers? It's something you said earlier. The metaphor, there's a story. I think Agnieszka, I first heard it from her. I can't remember. Okay, a ship has crashed at sea, and there's a big group of people, like kind of a Titanic situation.
Mm-hmm.
And there's hundreds of people in the sea, and here comes the rescue boat, and there's too many people to rescue. So what do? You kind of hover around the outside and you rescue the people who swim towards you.
Oh, yeah, I never heard that metaphor before.
Yeah, I thought it was a brilliant story. So your course is kind of the course that, I mean, people who really truly want to improve themselves and do something with their lives, it's perfect for them.
Right.
Yeah,
that's brilliant. I love that. I'm going to use that, and that's just it. I mean, because I have, we're so lucky, Chris. We really are. I mean, we live in this age where, I mean, if you want to study, it's really easy to get a student loan. I mean, the student loans are wonderful tools if they're utilized properly. We've got so many, institutions of higher learning. We've got the internet. I mean, you really unless you need a license to practice what you want to do, for the most part, people don't even need to go to school anymore to figure out how to do what they want to do. I mean, my wife is a self-taught web designer, but she had to go to school to get licensed to become an acupuncturist, but she found out that she liked the web design better. Oh man, I kind of lost.
No, you're right, Jim. There are so many things that people can do, so many fields right now with the internet. It literally, there's so much information out there that people can teach themselves anything.
Right. We were talking about swimmers. I lost my train of thought for a second. Where the cool thing about coaching, and I've really enjoyed, I've been studying life coaching now for several years. And life coaching is all about asking questions. Coaching is not about offering advice. I'm not a consultant, I'm a coach. And what the guy I started with, the guy who coached me, said, you think about when they're when a pilot is flying an airplane, being off course by 1 degree over the span of hundreds of miles, can land you in a very different place. And just a little bit of course correction can make all the difference in the world. And so that's ultimately what I'm trying to do is when people decide that they want to swim to me, it's not like we have to beat them over the head in order for them to succeed. It's just asking for the right questions in the right order to elicit this information from them that's already, for the most part, inside of them, and then just pointing them in the right direction. And for the most part, people just are off to the races once they've gone through that simple process. And it's heartbreaking that isn't more a part of, we have guidance counselors in high school and we have college counselors, but and so I'm asked a lot, oh, well, we've got all these things. Is there really a need for your course? I'm like, well, there's a $1.6 trillion student loan debt that says, yes, there is a need for this. And so I don't think it takes much to really get on the right track, but it absolutely starts with the desire to do so.
Exactly. Well said. What were the 6 mistakes? Do you know them offhand?
Well, I've got them on my second screen. I thought you'd ask me, and then I was afraid I'd draw a blank. And so mistake number 1 is assuming that you'll figure it out as you go. And that's what most of us do. Yes, me too. That's what most of us do. And in that, this is all, it's available as a PDF on my website. So if you go to testdriveyourfuture.com, a pop-up will eventually come up and ask if you want to see the 6 mistakes PDF. So if you want to see it, go ahead and fill that out, download it. But in the PDF, we say that, you wouldn't go and rent a car and then sit in the parking lot of the rental car place going, oh, well, now that I've got this car, where do I want to go? I'm like, well, you're on the clock, man. So wouldn't it make more sense to figure out where you're wanting to drive and then go rent the car versus doing it after you've already got the car? And it's the same thing with college. If you're already paying like at my school now, like $28,000 a year, do you want to start that clock, or have the clock running during your freshman year, maybe your sophomore year? Maybe I'll figure it out by my junior year. Like, no, you've already spent $60,000 and you haven't gone anywhere. So that's mistake number 1.
Jack Spirko of the Survival Podcast really goes on about the simplicity of learning to use Excel. Mm-hmm. And he's argued, he says, if any young student will just punch in the numbers on an Excel sheet and learn to use Excel and look at the projections and all that, it'll put anybody off from going to college.
Oh, yeah.
If they actually look at the numbers and they can use it properly as a tool. I always thought that was funny. Yeah. What other mistakes have we made?
Mistake number 2 would be getting stuck and staying stuck. And in there, we talk about the 3 ways that we think that people get stuck, which is autopilot, where you think you know where you want to go, but you haven't really thought about it. That was me. I was on autopilot, like, oh, I'm going to be a psychology major. I'm not going to put too much thought in this, and that's what I did. Asleep at the wheel would be people who really haven't thought about it at all. I at least have some notion of what I wanted to do, even though I hadn't really thought it through.
Yeah.
There are some people who go to college and major in undecided. Like, what a waste of money. My God. It's actually a major that you can declare. It's crazy.
What? Hold on. You can do undecided now.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
I did not know that.
I don't know that that's everywhere, but you can certainly go and you can be an undeclared major.
That's funny.
That's essentially what that means. Or then spinning your wheels, where you've got too many things going on, too many ideas, and maybe things that are completely unrelated. You might get several years in the school and figure out, if you're trying to do a double major, that one is the clear winner and the other is not, but then you've already wasted however much time taking classes in something that you're not going to use. So we try to get people to figure that out again ahead of time.
This is a brilliant list.
Thank you. And then going to college without a plan, that is, what we talk about in this particular page is when you are starting a small business, like if you wanted to go and open up a restaurant or something like that, and you didn't have the capital to do it, you could go to a bank and get a small business loan. But they are going to want to know everything. They're going to exactly for like, so what are you going to sell? What's your location? What are your hours going to be? What's the market for this? Is there a demand for chocolate tacos in your area? But so they scrutinize the heck out of it, and you basically have to donate a kidney to get a small business loan. But all you have to get a student loan is a pulse. Nobody asks you what you're going to do with it. They aren't going to they aren't going to check up on you while you're in school. Oh, you said you were going to major in such and such. Are you still doing that? Oh, by the way, are you actually going to class? Are you doing your homework? None of that is followed up upon. And
I mean, that topic there could be a whole other episode, another hour of discussion. Cool.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Mistake number 4 is related to that: not taking your time or money or your parents' money seriously.
Yeah.
All of these kind of lead in. You don't have, Beth tells the story in our book that she had absolutely no idea how much her schooling had cost until after graduation. She finishes at University of Vermont, goes back to her parents' house for a little while. They get the envelope in the mail that has, her balances, and she's like, holy crap. I mean, I had no idea.
Yeah.
And for the most part, and so there's actually a post on our blog on testdriveyourfuture.com that says, how different would things be if every time you went into one of your college classes, you had to pay admission at the door like you do at the movies or to a concert, and then you'd want to break down. And so I challenge people in that post to break down and figure out how much their classes are actually costing them. And in the post, I use the example of, I think it was at Princeton. Like, okay, so let's say that you have a 3-hour biology lab at Princeton once a week. And I took what was the tuition and room and board at Princeton at that time, which was like $60,000 a year, and did all of the math. And I included a calculator in the blog post so kids could look up any school and figure out how to do this. But it turned out that class was $400. If you had to pay $400 to get into the classroom for 3 hours to sit there and listen to the teacher, you better well believe you'd be taking damn good notes.
That is amazing. Yeah.
And people wouldn't even tolerate it. If people actually realized how much their classes were costing them, they would be up in arms. There'd be rioting, in front of the dean's office.
But that's the fact. That's how much it actually, costs.
That's how much it costs.
Yeah.
I mean, and even at my simple school, it was like, I think it comes down to like $75 for a 1-hour class. Like your English 101 class, $75 a pop every time you go there, 3 times a week from 8 to 9,
When I taught English in Madrid, the going rate was about $25 or euros an hour to give a bit of perspective. So yeah, it does put things into perspective when you break it down to the actual cost.
Right. Yeah. And if you wanted to do some math, think about there being 30 students in that classroom with each of you paying $75 a pop, they're making a good amount of money on having that teacher stand up in front of the room for 50 minutes.
No, these really are. This is a great list. I mean, I'm guilty of all of this. I was in college. My parents gave me their Shell card for gas. And then I came to realize that I could buy other things in the gas station on that card. And so I was buying beer and Playboy magazines. And then maybe a year into it, I actually stood up in the middle of the night and thought, hold on. Can they see the individual item that I'm paying for? I don't know. I still don't know this day, but it just exemplifies how, just blind, irresponsible, oblivious to money.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I was dating a girl in college, and she was doing everything with her student loans. And she was also like a daytime TV addict. And she was actually one of those people that, planned her course schedule around like her favorite talk shows or soap operas or whatever. I mean, it was ridiculous. I'm embarrassed to even admit that I dated her now, but she bought a television with her student loan money, $200-300 television. And I'm like, I haven't talked to her in 20 years. I don't have any idea if she's still even paying on her student loans, but I'm like, man, how much would that TV be? 8% interest over the course of 20 years. I mean, we're talking like a $5,000 television now, and people just have no idea.
Man.
Mistake number 5 on the list was assuming you know yourself better than you do. And again, we're all guilty of a lot of that.
Getting heavy, Jim. It's getting deep.
I know, and this is where why we have the whole first section of the course, where we invite students to go on this journey of self-discovery, really figuring out who they are, what they want out of life, what their skills and interests are. And I'm actually going to be interviewing with Brett tomorrow, and
Excellent.
When we went through this list, he's like, I want to dedicate an entire show to this particular mile marker or a college mistake.
Yeah,
and
I really enjoyed your interview with him, and I will definitely include that into the show notes for this.
Cool.
And I think it's a great idea because each of these points could be fleshed out so much more.
Right. Yeah. And this particular mistake has taken on a whole new life for me in light of all of the critical thinking stuff that we were talking about earlier. It's like assuming you know yourself better than you do, but then even taking a step back and saying, how did so I think I'm this person, or I think I know this about myself, or I think I like these things, but where did all that come from? I'm going to talk about this with Brett tomorrow, that Edward Bernays quote that said that most of our interests and tastes and preferences have been formed by people that we've never met before. We through popular culture, through advertising, through whatnot, have been molded and shaped our whole lives, to have these preferences, to have these desires, to like these things, and for the most part, none of us have any idea. I grew up listening to heavy metal music. Why did I listen to heavy metal music? Why was that a part of who I am? Why do I have this preference instead of that preference? And so I've recently been inviting people to not only like figure yourself out, but then take it a step back further and figure out why you are that way. And then if you discover through that process that you have come to be the way that you are through a way that you don't like or don't agree with. Like, when I was growing up, I used to watch 5 or 6 hours of television a day. So I was very molded and shaped by all of that, and have come, to really question some of the things that I know and some of the things that I believe now that I fully comprehend where it all came from. And that the people who were conveying those messages to me might not have had my best interests at heart. They might have been for their best interests.
This is definitely leaving me thirsty for more. I'm really looking forward to you fleshing this out with Brett. And, you lived off grid for a year. You went without TV. And I myself, when I moved to Madrid, I went without TV for probably 2 years. And it did something to me. It did. Mm-hmm. It really did reset me in a lot of ways. It's such a good point. Yeah. Very good. Very good, Jim. What else we got?
Cool. We've got one mistake left. And in this one, we say, believing your college and career path is a solo journey, not a team effort. And this is something that we wrote years ago, but it's also been really brought to the forefront through my participation with autonomy. Having this group of like-minded people who are on, we have similar interests and similar motivations. And we're looking out for each other's best interests. And so that's something that we absolutely invite our students to do in this course is we ask them to assemble what we call their navigation team. Could be parents, it could be teachers, it could be friends, anyone to help contribute to their figuring out who they are and what they want, helping keeping them motivated when going gets tough. Things like that is when we attempt any really large thing on our own, we're really probably destined for failure. It's like any large thing that's ever been accomplished has been, for the most part, you're standing on someone's shoulders or you've got a team of people backing you up. And so that's one thing that we absolutely encourage our participants to do, is to seek out a group of people that can be their support system through this process.
I'm hearing quite a few songs in the air, in the background to that, what you just said. The first one that comes to mind is Lean on Me.
Exactly.
When you're not strong. Very good, Jim. Any final thoughts before we wrap up?
Well, I just really appreciate having the opportunity to share all of this with you today, Chris. Thanks for having me on.
Excellent. What about plugins? I mean, I'm going to leave all the links necessary on mine, but audio plugins. Where what's the main website?
So testdriveyourfuture.com is the website. And the first page you'll come to is our landing page. There's basically a description of our philosophy, the problem as we see it, our solution, a description of what the course is. If you opt in for our mailing list, you'll get a copy of the 6 mistakes that I just went through. And I've worked with some people to come up with, I think, are some very helpful and insightful messages that we do in our autoresponder. You'll hear from me maybe once or twice a week, trying to highlight real stories of real people who have gone through this process, who have struggled with these, and they've either not come out on the other end favorably or they have. And so that's really helpful as well. On SoundCloud, we have an audio version of the 6 mistakes if you want to listen to that. I hope people come back and listen to this podcast again if they found it useful. And I've got one episode of School Sucks podcast out there, episode 633 with Brett Vanott, and he's invited me to come back on a monthly basis to kind of check in with what's going on with this topic. And I'm looking very much forward to doing that. We're going to be doing our second interview tomorrow.
I'm really looking forward to seeing how this works, seeing where this goes. And yeah, you're about to you are making lives of many people. I mean, God, I just wish I had this when I was younger, but hey, that's okay.
It's all a journey. That's one of the things I've really come to realize recently. I guess if I were going to leave on any note is I used to be really upset about all of this, talk about a waste of time, 5-6 years in school, tens of thousands of dollars. The part that does still have me a little angry is that the fact that the system seems predatory. Like it shouldn't be this easy for kids to get access to this much loan money. That's just wrong. Without the proper education to teach them how to use it, that makes me mad. But for the most part, I've really come to believe the old adage that life is a journey, not a destination, and that there has to have been some reason that we've gone through the trials that we have, some reason that our lives have unfolded the way that they have. So if you're coming upon this interview and you're later in life and you're a little upset about the way things have turned out for you, just realize that it's all part of the journey. It's all part of the unfolding. And I wouldn't trade anything. I had to go through graduate school. I went through AmeriCorps. I had to live off grid milking goats for 6 months to try to really figure out who I am. I ate spoiled food from the health food store. But it's brought me to where I am now with this very much more complete understanding of who I am and what I want out of life, and has allowed me to figure out how best I can pass this information along to the next generation, the younger people who are my students and my daughter. I mean, I wouldn't trade any of these experiences I have for the world, because I can convey this all to her and try to guide her as best I can.
Very inspirational, Jim. Thank you very much.
Hey, my pleasure, Chris.
Walking down the street, the children play. For them, it's just another day. The future's reflected in their parents' faces, who chose to stay on in this place. Well, they were born, went to school, got married, and kids, like their grandparents before them did. Got to escape, before it's too late. Although today I could say that I really will miss the when Santa. But yeah, I was right. Knew what it was like when Santa.
You've been listening to truthconduit.com with Chris McMillan. Go to the subscribe page and sign up to get notifications of the latest posts. And check out the support page to help keep it going.
Yeah, I've got a friend in Jesus Christ. I've got a friend in Jesus Christ, and Krishna and Buddha and my bartender.